I am so tired that I cannot even think straight. For almost 2 days now, I've been sleeping in airport terminals, eating whatever I could find, like a dog scavenging for food. I do not know what day of the week it is, nor can I remember the last 2 days since leaving Scotland. All I want to do is sleep, and yet sleep will not come. And my mind whirls and cannot be assuaged. In truth, I do not know what is real and what is not real, for my mind will not make the necessary changes to allow me to return to normal. I am home now. My wife could see the change in me immediately, and I think she was frightened. But she did not persist in endeavoring to get me to talk. She merely said that I should go to bed and try to sleep, and that we would talk tomorrow. But I don't remember which day is tomorrow, for I locked myself in my studio, and I have been attempting to sort this out. There is pale light streaming through my window blinds, so I know it must be another day, but I do not remember. My day began a day or two ago. I do not remember because the time zone change has distorted my memory a bit, and I am too tired to think about it. I remember waking up in my bed in the cottage of M during the night after being roused by strange sounds coming through my window from outside. I got out of bed and went to the window. The sound filtered in like an atmosphere of fragrance. It was the sound of the sheep. They were murmuring together, almost like they were praying, and though I knew that this was impossible, I could not deny it. They were praying. More like a chant. The sound was unnerving, and I wondered if the sound were in fact coming from my head as a psychic manifestation. Leaping out of the window, I went into the flock and immersed myself in the strangeness of it all. Their voices were strangely distinct and unique, and yet they were all murmuring in unison. And it was this that I found so strange, for how could they communicate with one another, and at the same time as a body, a group, a collection of something, a parish. I caught fragments of their speech. They were worried, afraid. Something bad was about to happen, and they knew it. "We need to bolt," one of the sheep said, but the others did not agree. "No," said another one, "the shepherd will protect us. He has promised. We must trust him and hold our ground." I looked at them and I was stupefied. At first, they took no notice of me, but by degrees that began to change. "Be careful what you say," said one of the sheep. "He is listening to us, even now. Act normal and stop speaking." After a few more moments of watching them carelessly nibbling on stubs of grass, I had to get away from them. It was almost dawn when I crawled back through my window and stood in my room. Now I could smell the strong scent of bacon, and I left the room and went to see if perhaps M needed any help with breakfast. I left my room and headed for the kitchen. But before I got there, I saw M sitting comfortably in the sitting room, the growing morning light diffusing the cottage into abstraction. I approached him, and as I got closer, I saw that he held a glass of whiskey with the bottle by his side. I good-naturedly asked him, "Is it Christmas already?" M laughed and said, "Every day is Christmas." He motioned for me to sit down, and I did so. M poured me a glass, and I accepted it, as if in a new tradition. He leaned back in his chair but said nothing, simply smiling as he continued to sip, his thoughts drifting away to who knows where. After a few moments, he began, "Lest you think that I am some stuffy, bookish intellectual, I want you to know that I understand what you are going through, not just today, but over this entire week. When I gave the book to you those few years ago, even then I understood what it would mean to you, what it would require of you. I do not apologize, as you have always had free will. Even now, you can ask me for my driver, and you may carry on as though none of this adventure had even happened." He paused and looked at me. I remained silent, just now taking my first sip of the rich, warm whiskey. I looked into his eyes but said nothing. He continued, "I do understand. I was you. I have been you. I am you." He leaned forward now, and as he did so, I sensed, for maybe just the first time, how real this man was, in his eyes, in his wrinkles, in the way he held his hands together, carefully caressing the pain, arresting it for only a moment, and in that pain, in that moment, was a weakness, a kindness. He spoke softly now. "Before this day begins, I would like to tell you a story about me, when I was you. I was a young boy, and my father had called me into his study, a place I rarely went. He called me into this secret space, and he told me of how it was to be. He said, 'Christopher, we must speak. Your mother and I named you Christopher because we love you and because we want you to become the kind of man that we see inside of you, even as you are only a boy. You must look to the saints for guidance and inspiration. They will not fail you. But Christopher, you must know that you have another name, a name not known to the world, a name not even known to your mother.' And when he said this, my heart sank, for how could I hide anything from her? My father saw my despair, but his words have never, even to this day, healed the scar of betrayal that I now realized was so central a part of me, a part that I was born with. Christopher, this is the way it has to be, the way it has always been, as far back as our story goes. Your name is M. I even remembered now how I looked at him and wondered if I had misheard him. How could M be a name? But I said nothing. He went on. "Christopher, do you know what my name is?" Not my Christian name, but my second name, like yours. It is also M. You and I share a name, but we share so much more. There is so much I want to give to you, my son. My father went on to tell me the story of Melantros, of Sorren, and how those writings had been passed down for many generations. At that time, I did not really understand the fullness of what my father was saying, and I know that he knew this as well. My father was simply preparing me for what was to be. He spoke for a long time about the sound of the world and about things which I cannot remember, even now. And though my mind was reeling with the advent of these new ideas, a very core part of myself was troubled. My father could see it in my eyes, and he prodded me. "Tell me your thoughts, son." I was nervous, for I did not want to disappoint my father. But when he persisted, I said, "Father, you and Mother have always told me to love the saints and to always have a prayer on my lips. But I have never heard about any of these new ideas. How can this be?" Em leaned back in his chair now and stopped speaking. He raised his glass to his lips and drank deeply. Neither one of us spoke for a long time, and I could now see that Em was crying, either lost in that memory as a boy or perhaps in anticipation of what was to come. He leaned forward again and continued. What I knew then as a boy, it is still with me now. I follow this path of my father and his father and his father, but I cannot be sure that that little boy was wrong. But what I've come to believe is this, that the Christian legacy, the Christian heritage that is available to us all who seek it, is a powerful and lasting truth. Melantros knew this, and he never renounced it. But there is more, and Melantros knew this as well. Sorren had shown him this. The past centuries have proven that the ways of the world can be unfolded, that they can be known and studied and appreciated, and that this appreciation gives an even greater glory to the Creator. But as we study the world, we also uncover ways of the world best left unknown. I know that you have heard the story of Sawney Bean. Sawney also knows that there is more to this world, but we have seen Sawney's heart. It is as black as night, and Sawney Bean chose the life of a monster instead of a man. His heart is like the night sky before the Creator had set work upon it. We seek to know the stars, but Sawney cannot even see the stars. He is blind to the stars, to the Creator, to our pain. These monsters are all around us now, but they are in hiding. My father asked me to open my eyes, to not be blind. I have done this all the time, knowing that I have another name. I am Christopher, my mother's son. He looked at me with anguish in his eyes because he was still lost inside of a very powerful moment. I did not want to disturb his powerful muse, so I waited. I could smell the bacon sizzling, and I wondered if Em had forgotten about it. At last, he seemed to emerge. "Come," he said, "let us prepare our breakfast, and then I will take you to the studio." The breakfast was abundant, and I could see that Em had spared no detail. I could now smell the sweet aroma of fresh brewed coffee. Em said a prayer before the meal, and I bowed my head in reverence. Before he began to eat, he asked me a question. "Tell me about your life," he asked. "What do you care about?" "I care about people," I started to say. "I care about the goodness and kindness." No, he almost spat as he dropped his fork on his plate. "I do not want to hear that nonsense," he said. "Be real with me here, because I have no time for useless platitudes. And I think that you and I are in agreement. Tell me what moves you, and tell me why you exist." "These are existential questions." Stop, he said, but this time I could sense a kindness in his eyes. He paused. "If you do not return from this trip, will anyone even care? Tell me why you live." He started eating. For almost a minute I sat there and tried to think of something to say. Em did not seem to be annoyed by my silence. After another minute I started to speak. Words came out automatically, without effort. "You are referring to a kind of love that I am unfamiliar with," I began. "A few years ago I would have answered that I live because I must. And I would have meant it. My children and my wife were the only thing to live for. And everything I did was because of an obligation I felt for them. A promise I made many years ago. Most of my life was spent in keeping that promise. But after a while, when the promise has been fulfilled, there must be a new reason to live. I chose to live inside my head, for I was familiar with it. And inside my head I had no obligations, no expectations to fulfill. Inside of my head was my muse, my property. I have lived here for many years now, mostly alone, mostly obscure, and mostly unfulfilled. I have agonized over creative matters, trivial matters, for days and sometimes long into the night. But I had no one to speak with about my dreams. And that is when I decided to write them down. And that is when I discovered myself. And I no longer felt alone. If I were to die out here in this beautiful and lonely landscape, I would still be alone, for I am looking for something farther, something beyond myself. I know it is there, for I have experienced it. But I don't know what it is called, and I do not know where it is. I looked up and was watching me with a smile. He was finished eating. His knowing eyes bore into mine, and like a confessor, I felt a hint of shame, although I did not understand it. Please eat, he said warmly. I know what is in your heart, for you and I are much alike. Finish eating, then I will show you what you have been looking for. I finished breakfast. Then I helped clean up the dishes and put away the unfinished food. M did not speak, nor did I. And in truth, I have never felt such satisfaction in doing such mundane but important work. For just cleaning the dishes was an act of willfulness. When we were finished, he turned to me. Let us go down into the studio, he said. Do not be frightened. Before descending the secret passageway, he turned to me once more and asked, Are you prepared to hear the sound of the world? Yes, I answered, but I would be lying to you if I said that I was not afraid. You are wise, M answered. The first time I heard this, I became sick. What is this sound of the world? I asked M as he began to descend into the darkness of the studio. M stopped and spoke without turning toward me. He spoke with conviction, if just a little bit mournfully. One can never truly hear the sound, he admitted. What we hear instead is a approximation, a copy, facsimile, but it is only a shadow of the true sound. For the true sound is the voice of God, and to hear it is to come face to face with eternity and with death. Then he continued down into the studio, and I followed him quietly. When I got to the bottom and saw the studio, I was stunned. This is not the same studio that I had visited a few days prior. Everything was changed. There was an astonishing array of audio gear set up on a table around which 2 chairs were placed. I am a musician, so I knew what I was looking at. There was a keyboard connected to a large modular frequency bank of oscillators and filters and knobs and glide modules. Patch cords were connected everywhere to this bank, and I could see that it was turned on, for it was suffused with glowing LED lights. An oscilloscope pulsed with a very long frequency, though the amplitude was small, like this was waiting for input from the keyboard as a hungry beast stalks its prey. Studio monitors were mounted on the walls. I looked at M with an expression of disbelief. What you connected in the shed is a vestige, a relic from the past, he said. As you can see, I have changed with the times. You are a musician? I asked cautiously. No, he answered, you are a musician. And I am merely a translator, an interpreter, if you understand what I mean. I create nothing. The translation is of the music of the Creator, but the translation is limited by our feeble ability to experience it. The creation is the sound of the world, I asked. The sound of the world is the sound of creation, he corrected me. But not the creation as you would understand it from modern physics. For the creation is never finished. And the sound is of a continuous and never-ending process of creation. Please sit down, he said. I must tune my mind. And then he brought out the guitar that I had already played. You should close your eyes, he suggested. This could be very distracting to you and possibly make you sick. You have already experienced this sickness. But if you close your eyes, you will experience a slow, dull lassitude, weariness spread throughout your body. And the effect is relaxing. I closed my eyes and waited. Perhaps a minute passed and still I waited. I heard nothing. And like the moment before the pinprick from the doctor's needle to send you into oblivion, I was apprehensive. But the moment the drug has been administered, one falls away by degrees until past, present, and future merge together. And a few minutes cannot be distinguished from a few hours. Eternity. And so it was for me until I felt the faint tingling of my fingers and my eyes began to twitch. Now I felt the pressure inside of me like the pressure that grows inside of the head when one ascends or descends rapidly. But I was afraid to open my eyes. Now I was feeling a heaviness, a weakness that comes with being yoked to a heavy burden, and like faint twinkling of distant stars, I heard the sound, the gentle, lilting sound of the guitar. At first it was the single notes of an exotic scale that I could not identify. A scale that, unlike the sound of the major scale, had no identifiable degrees, but seemed to be endless and without the identifiable octave. My mind tried to follow the sequence of notes, but suddenly the notes became something different, as an avalanche buries the sound of dripping water. For the sound was inside of my head, and I could no longer hear myself think. Floating, turning, warm, embryonic, pulsing, interfacing, freezing, numbing waves of energy washed over me like a tsunami, a tidal wave of subdued force. Blue, oily blue, green tides of organic, suffocating viscidity. My mind was throbbing through an overdose of impressions. I was gently moving with the tidal force of endless eternity. Black seas of infinity breaking against mossy, cyclopean stones of forgotten, unmarked time, unmarked, unfinished, unchanged, eons upon countless eons of weakly fortified, lapping oceans of twilight rays of silver and low rumbling, grinding, filled my mind with images of slowly turning columns, great gears of antediluvian machinery turning colossal towers of fossilized stone and whispered words. The waves were part of me now, and I could feel myself being stretched and slowly pulled apart. The sound was all around me now, as I was part of the sound, part of the experience, absorbed and metabolized. And I could see everything from all points and from within. Massive stone monoliths surrounded me, locking me in, and I saw them from within, from inside the structure. Then I realized that everything was moving, shifting like the inner workings of a clockwork, meshing together intricately. The sound was deep, powerful, devouring. And then, through the inner vision of my mind, I saw openings within the walls of stone. And as the turning continued, strange gaps, fissures, opened up to reveal wet, slippery things like the tentacles of a sea mollusk or some extinct creature, Leviathan, like the pale, sinuous cortex of the human brain. I was horrified, for I was seeing the oozing, squirming matrix of the workings of the Creator and the created thing. The flesh-like matrix moved like a snake, coiling in and out of the turning aperture, and I felt like I was about to be drawn in. I tried to scream, but I was part of the matrix now, and my voice was not my own. And then I felt something soft and flesh-like, with a plasticity that had once been my body. My eyes opened slowly as I came out of the stupor. Em was staring at me carefully, thoughtfully. "Are you back now?" he asked with concern. I could not feel my body. "Where am I?" "Sit still," he said. "You are still becoming acclimated. In a minute, you will feel normal again." Several minutes passed until I could feel the warmth of my body again, and the feeling of being attached completely brought me back. A minute later, I asked, "What happened to me?" "The sound of the world can be frightening," Em said poignantly. "The sound is too much for the mind to coordinate, however, so it must be subjected to secondary stimulus, and the mind constructs a new reality, a new paradigm. What you have been through is an interpretation, the best way for your mind to correlate such an experience. You have heard it now, and you have understood its power. Yes, you are strong, and I had confidence in you all along. But rest for a few minutes before trying to think again. I will wait." When I awoke, Em was watching me carefully. Now I was sitting at a small table. The audio equipment was gone. The guitar was gone. Everything was as before. On the table lay an old leather satchel. It was closed and fastened with thick straps. A large glass of water was placed before me, and in front of him lay a knife, a small knife. He smiled and motioned for me to drink the water. I drank the entire glass. Then he spoke. "Everything I promised you is inside of this satchel," he said. "Everything and more, for I have not told you all that there is to know yet. There are documents dating back to the time of Melanthros, musings, speculations, experimental data, last words, last rites, blessings, formula, letters of lineage, letters of heritage, all these things for you to have. But as I have already told you, this satchel can only be possessed by an heir. I have chosen you to be my heir, for I have no family. This will require a ceremony, the vows and the acceptance of certain points of honor. But this will also require an act of faith, a sacrifice. Do you still wish to continue?" How could I not agree to this after the experience I had just returned from? Yes, I was frightened, but still I could not imagine the life of regret I would lead if I failed to accept this offer. Thoughts of my family, I am not proud to admit, were pushed back in my mind, and I did not even consider the consequences of my actions. Hypnotized by the prospect, I nodded my approval. Then he started to speak. He was obviously reciting words that he had memorized, and it was my thought that these words were traditional, coded within the family heritage of the book and the lineage of Melanthros. May the Lord bear witness to my feeble words, and that thou shalt not be offended. The blood is sacred, the blood is wise. The blood shall make us free today and for eternity. The blood shall bear witness this day, as it has flowed freely from the saints, until the kingdom be rebuilt in heaven, forever to remain. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "Now you must repeat these words," he said. "The blood of the Lord is righteous. The blood of the Lord is righteous," I repeated. "In righteousness the blood remembers. In righteousness the blood remembers," I repeated. "Now say it alone. The blood of the Lord is righteous. In righteousness the blood remembers," I said. And then he picked up the knife that was on the table and held it to his open hand. He closed his eyes for a moment, and I could see that his lips moved in silent prayer. Then he pushed it into his palm until it drew blood. Just a drop. A small crimson drop of blood trickled from the wound. Suddenly I was apprehensive and I felt visceral pain in my stomach. He did not speak. pushed the knife in front of me and waited. I looked at the knife with horror, and then I looked into his hand as the blood slowly flowed onto the table. Just a small rivulet, a few drops, but it was enough to cause me panic. Then I looked up and saw that he was staring into my eyes, but they were calm, as if the apprehension I was feeling meant nothing to him. I was alone with my doubts, but I knew that this was my decision to make. And still I waited. Perhaps several minutes passed. I do not remember. Slowly I picked up the knife. There was a small smear of blood on the tip. I looked up again, but now to my shock, the look on the face of him had changed, and now he was anxious, frightened. Perhaps he was afraid I would back out of the ceremony. I do not remember. But I could tell that something was wrong. And still he did not utter a word, and it was clear to me that he was allowing me to make this decision without pressure of any kind. The blood had now coagulated on his hand, and that somehow helped me to make my decision. I pushed the tip of the knife into my palm until it drew blood, and I felt no pain. Then I reached out and took his hand and held it. He looked up with relief, for he was happy. To you, I am but a second father, but to me, you are my only son. Suddenly, he became serious. The smile faded from his face, and I could tell that he was reorienting his mind. His eyes held me in his powerful gaze as he spoke. Something is happening. I felt it an hour ago. This requires my immediate attention. Now listen carefully, for I do not have time to repeat myself. You are to leave this cottage now. Go to the Sheep's Head and wait for me there. I will come, and I will bring your travel bag and the satchel. You are in danger this very minute, so go quickly, my son. The look in his eyes was harrowing. He was frightened. There was no time for me to analyze the situation. I stood up and went quickly to the door. But before leaving, I stopped to look back and see what M was doing. He was standing at the cabinet near the door in front of the weapons cache. I watched him as he filled his coat pockets with ammunition and spare magazines. He took a long rifle and some handguns. Carefully, I slipped out of the cottage before he saw me looking at him. Then I headed for the path to take me to the Sheep's Head. The brisk walk along the cobbled path to the Sheep's Head woke me up and dissipated some of my anxiety brought about by my ceremony with M. It was still early and only a few people were inside eating breakfast and drinking tea. I wanted to order a glass of whiskey, but thought it best to wait. So instead I ordered a coffee and sat alone by the window. M said that I was in danger, even now, and I could not stop thinking about what that could mean. I was beginning to realize that I was ignorant of much of what was happening, and that I was given only so much information to draw myself closer and closer to something. I looked up suddenly. "You do not look like a shepherd," said an old man with white, unkempt hair and a long white beard. "Let me see your hands," he said. I could not decide if he was being serious or if he was trying to taunt me. My first thought was to tell him to mind his own business, but something stopped me and held my tongue. "You look like a Scotsman," he said, "but I need to see your hands before I decide." He was serious. But instead of getting angry with him and causing a scene at the inn, I showed him my hands. "You are not a shepherd," he said firmly. "You are an artist." "I am a musician," I admitted. "Yes, I know you are. Musicians live in their own special world, and they care nothing for lost sheep." "Are you a shepherd?" I asked, trying to change the subject from myself. "May I sit down, or would you prefer that I stand?" I invited him to sit with me. He sat down and continued speaking. "I am a wanderer," he said. "I am a shepherd too, for I have been wandering these hills for many years now. The cold and the rain I welcome, for they have no hold over me now. The Lord has set me on a strange path, a difficult path, and I have followed this path to my own demise. But I am not bitter. The highlands are dark and the highlands are cold. Sometimes the Lord wanders these hills because he has respect for the shepherd. Tell me your name," I said, "and tell me about this path you are on." I was given the name Daniel, as God is my judge, for that is its meaning. My father was a shepherd, and his father before him. I have lived in these hills my entire life, and I have served my father as I have served the master of all men. One night long ago, I lost one of my sheep in a storm. But even as in the words of Luke in chapter 15, I went out into the storm to bring back the lost sheep. That was 13 years ago. I almost fell off my chair. "You have not been home in 13 years?" I exclaimed with utter disbelief. "These hills are my home," he said. "I am home." I was incredulous. "Then why are you here now, Daniel? Have you found your lost sheep?" "I searched and searched until I became lost," he said. "And now I am finished being a shepherd. I searched until I had forgotten what I was searching for, and I could no longer remember my home. I have finished being a shepherd." "What?" I looked at him with alarm, for I could not understand this man, and I wondered if I was missing something. The The sheep is lost, he said with resignation. The sheep has been dead for many years now, I know that. Then why did you continue to search? My commitment was to the Lord, he answered. What will you do now? I asked. The hills are my home now, he answered. I will go out into the hills and wander until I die. For I am a lost sheep now, and I have lost my master. I heard someone come in from outside, and I turned to see who it was, hoping it was M. But to my surprise, it was the driver who brought me here from Edinburgh, the man with the brown derby. I turned back to Daniel, but he was gone. He was gone. Vanished. Unless I had imagined the whole thing. My mind was beginning to slip. But now the man in the derby had spotted me and was walking directly to me with purpose. You need to come with me, he said. M has instructed me to find you and to bring you to the airport. We must leave now. But I have to go back to the cottage, I said. I have to speak with M. I have your bag in the car, he said. M was quite determined that we leave as soon as possible. Please come with me without further discussion. And so I went out into the cool air to where the car was parked. But before getting in, I noticed the distant reports of gunfire, and I began to worry. The driver pulled away from the Sheep's Head Inn quickly. Then he turned around and he said, "There's whiskey there on the seat." But now I was frightened, confused, and angry, and I had no desire to drink whiskey. I was determined to find out the truth and not abandon M in the middle of a crisis. I heard gunfire coming from the plateau. The hunting season is early. No, I said vehemently. I saw M filling his pockets with guns and ammunition. I know what is going on, sir. He told me that something was happening and that I was in danger. You will be safe once we reach the airport, he said. I heard the sheep talking this morning, I told him. M has only confirmed what I already knew. You cannot hold me against my will. Tell me what is happening, or stop the car right now. After a tense moment, he began to speak. Scotland is a country of legends, he began. We are a nation of legends, and we guard our legends like we guard our freedom. Great beasts and leviathans form the boundaries of our folklore. Great serpents and worms have attacked us and terrorized our women and children in dreams and in waking moments, devouring our goats and cows and sheep while we slept. But our country is a country of strong men, brave men who have guarded this and done battle against every kind of evil. M is one of these men. Are you saying that a great worm is attacking his cottage? You know this to be true, he answered. I do not believe it. You do believe it, he replied. That is why you are here. That is why you have come. Relax, for you are safe. The music that you have heard is like an invitation. And strange things have been seen and heard at night near the cottage. And this is why the local people fear M. For M has invited this thing. He continued to speak, but his words lulled me to sleep. And I woke up when he opened my car door and waited for me to get out. He handed me my travel bag and my boarding pass. Then he bowed low as if I were a special person deserving of honor. I hope to see you again someday, he said with a wink. There is much more to learn, and there is much more to see. Farewell, he said, and then he left me and drove away. I walked through the airport on my way to the gate. People were everywhere, thousands of people, all on their way to their own destinations, all of them intent, lost in private thoughts like the countless, mindless sheep I had been around. I tried not to look at them. After going through security, I relaxed a bit, for I had time now to get to my gate without hurrying. I sat down in a secluded chair and waited for boarding to begin. I didn't want to think about my experience until I was safely on the plane, so I just sat there and let my mind drift. Perhaps a half an hour passed. And then I heard an announcement saying that my flight was being delayed. I panicked. This had to be a mistake, so I listened closely for them to repeat it. Yes, my plane was being delayed. There is no point in reliving this experience. The anxiety I was feeling. But it was many, many hours later before I was sitting safely in my seat next to the window. Many hours had passed, and I had not spoken a single word all day. Then the plane was delayed on the tarmac, and I felt my anxiety increase. For all I wanted to do was leave, to just get started. When I was finally in the air and the stewardess asked me if I wanted anything, I asked her to bring me whiskey. After the second glass, I was beginning to calm down. And that is when I rested my head against the cold window and fell asleep. I woke up when we were preparing for landing for my connecting flight. My anxiety rose immediately, but the entire process went smoothly for me. And within 2 hours, I was once again sitting in my seat for the short flight to Minneapolis. Tired, exhausted, I started walking the long jetway tunnel. My travel bag was in my hand, so I walked, just following the people in front of me without thinking. But suddenly I heard my name, and then a second time. I stopped and turned around, and there was my wife, sitting in a chair waiting for me. I looked at her for a moment because I had almost forgotten her face. She took one look at me and her expression suddenly changed to fear. I went up to her slowly and put my arms around her, and I was trembling slightly. She kissed me. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "I just want to go home now." She had her SUV with her, and after throwing my bag on the back seat, I got into the passenger seat and waited for her to get in. The drive home was long, and she did not ask me questions, for she was allowing me the space I needed. I looked out the window. It was the middle of the night, but I didn't know what day it was. The lights from the city were bright and strangely comforting, as if the utter desolation of the highlands were but a dream. And now that dream was over. Airplanes flew overhead. Lights from cars and bridges and traffic signs were like an assault to my senses, and I closed my eyes. The car door opened and the overhead light came on. My wife stood outside and smiled. "We're home," she said. "Are you going to survive?" That was a joke, something that I had heard her say hundreds of times, but now I found it utterly charming, and it would always mean something special to me. She took hold of my arm as I got out of the car. She had never done this before. I stood in my driveway. The outdoor light was on. The air was cool. The street was empty. And it was just the two of us together. Then she took hold of my hand. Her hands were so warm and soft. Her touch left a faint, transient trail of tingling, like a weak shock, and I felt calmness, a visceral draining away of something. A sudden wave, a surge of euphoria flowed throughout my body, and my nerves prickled like the effects of a numbing, centrifugal narcotic. She raised up my hand to her face and kissed it. And when I looked into her eyes, the entire experience collapsed around me. I was home, and now I understood what the old man at the sheep's end was talking about. For his words came back to me now, and I understood. These were the hands of a shepherd. Quietly, I went into my house and up the stairs to my studio. My place of solace, my place of freedom. I sat in my chair in front of the computer, and it came to life, for it had been asleep since I had been gone. Hundreds of emails waited for me to answer, and I had music waiting to be mixed. A minute later, the door opened, enough for me to see the head of my wife. "Do you need anything?" she asked, gently. I smiled and nodded my head. "I'll be in soon," I answered. She closed the door softly and walked away. I could hear the faint squeaking of the wood floor as she went into our bedroom. And then I was alone, completely alone. And then the sounds of my life slowly began to return. The fan on my computer hard drive started. Outside, a car door closed, a distant horn. A disembodied voice. A siren. And finally, the sound of my own breathing. This was my home. This was my life. Life is what we have. Life is what we are. Life is a gift. Then I poured a glass of whiskey, took out my phone and recorded this entry. My 6th day in Scotland. And home.